It was a cold November evening in Tampa, Florida. The streets buzzed with hurried footsteps as people wrapped in coats and scarves rushed to their destinations. The neon lights of bars and restaurants flickered against the damp pavement, reflecting the city's restless energy. Amidst this, a man sat hunched on the sidewalk, his back against a closed storefront. His clothes were worn thin, his face unshaven, and his hands roughened by time and hardship. His name was Daniel Carter. A Vietnam veteran turned drifter, he had seen better days, far better. Once he had a wife, a house, and a steady job as a mechanic. But fate had been cruel. His wife had passed from an illness that drained both his finances and his spirit. He fell into depression, lost his job, then his home. The downward spiral had led him here, to the cold pavement, to nights spent under the open sky, to a reality where his existence was overlooked by passers-by. Tonight, though, something was different. The streets were more crowded than usual, and in the midst of it, a woman walked with a small entourage. She was elegantly dressed in a dark blue suit, her blonde hair framing a confident face that many Floridians recognized. It was Pam Bondi, Florida's former Attorney General. Even out of office, she carried the aura of power and influence, her name still synonymous with legal battles and political maneuvering. Daniel didn't recognize her immediately. To him, she was just another person walking by, someone who could, perhaps, spare a little kindness. His stomach rumbled, and his hands trembled slightly from the cold. He swallowed his pride, as he had done countless times before, and looked up at her as she passed. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice rough and hoarse. "Could you spare $1?" Pam Bondi paused mid-step, turning her sharp eyes toward him. The people accompanying her also stopped, looking at Daniel with varying expressions. Pity, discomfort, indifference. For a moment there was silence, a hush in the air, as if the city itself waited for her response. Then she spoke. Her words were not what anyone expected. Pam Bondi looked down at Daniel, her gaze unreadable. The usual response to such a request would be simple: a polite decline, a hurried step forward, or, on rare occasions, a quick donation before moving on. But Pam did none of these. Instead, she knelt down beside Daniel, much to the shock of her entourage and the few onlookers who had begun to notice the exchange. "Why $1?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Daniel blinked. He had expected her to either ignore him or toss a few coins his way out of obligation. This question was unexpected. "Well," he muttered, clearing his throat, "it's not much, but $1 could get me a little food, maybe a cup of coffee. Something warm, you know?" Pam studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she reached into her designer handbag. Not for $1, but for something else entirely. She pulled out a crisp $100 bill and held it up between two fingers. "Here," she said, offering it to him. The small crowd that had gathered murmured in surprise. Daniel, too, stared at the bill, not immediately reaching for it. "Ma'am, I asked for $1. Pam smirked slightly. "Yes, you did. But tell me, Daniel, what would you do with 100? He hesitated. $100 was a small fortune for someone in his position. It could mean several meals, a few nights in a shelter, or even a chance to get back on his feet if spent wisely. But he had learned to be wary of generosity that came with conditions. "I'd eat," he admitted. "Maybe get a warm place to sleep for a night or two. Try to stretch it out as long as I can." Pam nodded as if expecting that answer. Then, shockingly, she withdrew the bill and placed it back into her purse. "Not yet," she said. The crowd gasped. Daniel felt a familiar pang of disappointment, the kind that came when hope was dangled before him only to be snatched away. "What do you mean, not yet?" he asked, his voice edged with frustration. Pam stood up, brushing off her suit. "I'll give you the 100, but on one condition. You meet me here tomorrow, same time. If you do that, I'll give you this bill and another one just like it." Daniel frowned. "Why?" She smiled, but there was something in her eyes, something calculating. "Because I want to see if you're serious about wanting change." The crowd, uncertain of what to make of this, murmured again. Some thought she was being cruel, others intrigued. Daniel clenched his jaw. It wasn't often that he was given an opportunity like this. After a long pause, he finally said, "All right, I'll be here." Pam nodded approvingly. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, her entourage following closely behind. As Daniel sat back against the cold pavement, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an act of charity. Pam Bondi had something planned, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. The night was colder than usual, and Daniel could feel it deep in his bones. The city never truly slept, but for those like him, those who had nowhere to go, the darkness stretched longer than it did for everyone else. He sat huddled against the same storefront, his mind racing with thoughts about the unusual encounter with Pam Bondi. Would she really come back? Would she truly hand him 2 crisp $100 bills? Or was this just a political stunt? Some elaborate test designed to humiliate him? By morning, his stomach ached with hunger, but he forced himself to hold on. He scavenged a half-eaten sandwich from a dumpster behind a cafe and drank from a water fountain in the park. He had been through worse. If all it took to earn $200 was showing up at the same spot by evening, he would do it. The day passed slowly. People walked by, some giving him looks of pity, others of disgust. He was used to it. He didn't expect kindness from strangers anymore. Then, as the sun began to dip below the skyline, he heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking against the pavement. He looked up. Pam Bondi was walking toward him, dressed in another elegant suit, her entourage trailing behind her. She smiled slightly as she approached. "I see you kept your word, Daniel." "I said I would," he replied, eyeing her cautiously. She reached into her handbag again, and this time, she didn't hesitate. She pulled out 2 crisp $100 bills and handed them to him. Daniel took them, his rough fingers brushing against the smooth paper. For a moment, he felt the weight of the money in his hands, the difference it could make, the food it could buy, the comfort it could provide. But before he could thank her, Pam spoke again. "What's your plan now?" Daniel hesitated. "I'll get some food. Maybe find a cheap motel for the night." Pam studied him carefully, then did something that caught him completely off guard. She reached into her purse again, pulled out a business card, and handed it to him. "My office," she said. "Come by tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. sharp. I want to offer you something more than just money." Daniel stared at the card. He didn't know whether to feel hopeful or suspicious. "You're serious?" he asked. Pam nodded. "I don't believe in just handing out cash and walking away, Daniel. If you're willing to work for it, I can help you get back on your feet. But only if you show up." Daniel swallowed hard. The money in his hands was real. The card was real. The opportunity, whatever it was, felt real. But was he ready? After a long pause, he finally nodded. "All right, I'll be there." Pam smiled again, this time with something resembling satisfaction. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away into the night. Daniel sat there, staring at the business card, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of hope. Daniel barely slept that night. The $200 in his pocket burned like a hot coal, an amount that could mean survival for a week or more if spent wisely. He could get food, a warm bed for a few nights, maybe even some new clothes. But what gnawed at him even more was the business card. Pam Bondi wasn't just a wealthy woman tossing money at a homeless man to feel good about herself. She had a plan, something bigger than a handout. But why him? What did she see in a man who had spent years struggling on the streets? By morning, Daniel sat on the edge of a bus stop bench, staring at the card for the 100th time. It had her office address, embossed in gold letters, standing out like a beacon. The meeting was at 10 a.m. If he went, his life could change. Or maybe, he thought bitterly, it was just another false hope. With a deep breath, he made his decision. The building stood tall and pristine, a stark contrast to the world Daniel knew. He hesitated at the entrance, suddenly feeling out of place among the businessmen and women in suits, all moving with purpose. A security guard eyed him warily but said nothing as he stepped inside. The receptionist, A young woman with glasses and a headset glanced up, momentarily surprised by his presence. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. Daniel cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious of his worn-out jacket and unshaven face. I have an appointment with Pam Bondi." The woman raised an eyebrow but checked her system. To his surprise, she nodded. "Yes, Mr. Carter. She's expecting you. Please, follow me." Daniel followed her through a sleek hallway until they reached a large office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, Pam Bondi sat behind an elegant wooden desk, reviewing some documents. When she saw him, she smiled and gestured for him to sit. "I'm glad you came," she said. Daniel sat cautiously. "I almost didn't." Pam leaned forward. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't. Trust is hard when you've been let down too many times." Daniel exhaled. "So what's this really about? You gave me money. Now you want to do more? Why?" Pam's expression grew serious. "Because I believe people deserve a second chance. And because I know what it's like to see someone struggle and feel powerless to help." Daniel frowned. "Someone close to you?" Pam hesitated before nodding. "A friend. A veteran like you. He lost everything after coming home from war. He didn't get the help he needed. He ended up on the streets, and he never made it out." Daniel swallowed hard. He had known many men like that. He could have been one of them. "So what are you offering?" he asked, wary but intrigued. Pam slid a file across the desk. "A job. A fresh start. I have connections with organizations that help veterans reintegrate into society. If you're willing to work for it, I can get you into a program that provides job training, housing assistance, and even counseling." Daniel stared at the file, his mind racing. It was more than he had ever hoped for. But hope was a dangerous thing. "What's the catch?" he asked. Pam smiled. "No catch. Just commitment. You have to want it." Daniel sat there, staring at the papers, realizing that for the first time in years, someone was offering him more than just charity. They were offering him a future. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the file. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not just words on paper, but an entire future he had almost forgotten was possible. He glanced up at Pam, searching for any sign that this was a trick, a setup, a cruel joke. But all he saw was sincerity, determination. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's been a long time since I had a real shot at anything." Pam leaned forward, her eyes steady. "Then let this be the time that changes everything." The words hit him hard. He exhaled slowly, looking down at the documents again. The program outlined in the file wasn't just about handing him a job. It was about rebuilding his life, job training, financial literacy courses, temporary housing assistance, even therapy. It was a structured path back to normalcy, to dignity. But doubt gnawed at him. "What if I fail?" Pam sat back, folding her hands. "Then you get back up and try again. But you won't be doing it alone. The program provides support. And I'll be watching your progress too." Daniel scoffed lightly, shaking his head. "So now you're my guardian angel?" Pam chuckled. "Hardly, but I do believe in accountability. If I invest in you, I expect you to invest in yourself." He took a deep breath. The easy choice would be to walk out of this office, take his $200, and continue surviving the way he always had. The hard choice was to trust, to believe that change was possible. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to believe. "What do I need to do?" he asked, voice steadier now. Pam smiled and handed him a pen. "Sign your name. Show up tomorrow morning for your intake session. And don't look back." Daniel hesitated for only a moment before pressing the pen to paper. His name looked foreign to him, like a relic of a life he had once known. But as the ink dried, he felt something shift inside him. Hope. Pam stood and extended her hand. "Welcome to your new beginning, Daniel." He shook her hand, gripping it firmly. "I won't waste this chance." As he walked out of the office, business card still in his pocket, something in him felt different. Lighter, stronger. For the first time in years, Daniel Carter wasn't just surviving. He was starting to live again,